She posted on Instagram. I finally upgraded my life, right after leaving me for someone she called better. I stayed silent and focused on myself. Months later, she walked into my office for an interview and froze mid-sentence when she saw me sitting there. I need someone who actually has a future. You're comfortable, but comfortable isn't enough for me anymore. That sentence didn't come with tears. It didn't come with a raised voice or a slammed door or any of the dramatic theatrics people associate with the end of a relationship. It came calm, the way you'd announce that you were switching phone carriers. She said it standing in our kitchen. Well, my kitchen, while I was pouring coffee into a mug that still had her lipstick on the rim from the morning before. I set the pot down very slowly. I turned around. I looked at her face, and what I saw there wasn't guilt or sadness or even hesitation. It was relief, like she'd been carrying a heavy bag for too long and had finally decided to just put it down on the sidewalk and walk away without it. I asked her one question. Is there someone else? She didn't say yes, but she took exactly 2 seconds too long before she said no. And in those 2 seconds, I got every answer I needed. I didn't push. I didn't argue. I didn't demand details or names or timelines. I just nodded once, slowly, and said, okay. She looked almost disappointed that I didn't fight. I think she wanted the scene. I didn't give it to her. And I had no idea, absolutely none, that 8 months later, she would walk into a conference room where I was sitting on the other side of the table, and the word, okay, would take on a completely different meaning. If you enjoy real stories like this, subscribe, because what happened next changed everything for me. We had been together for 2 years and 4 months. I was 28, she was 26. We met at a mutual friend's rooftop birthday party, dated for 6 months before she officially moved some of her things into my apartment, and somewhere in that space of time, I had quietly built my entire life around her. That's the only context you need. The morning she left, she packed 3 bags. She did it efficiently, which told me she had already been planning this for a while. People who are surprised by their own decisions don't pack that fast. She folded things neatly. She didn't forget anything. She even went into the bathroom and collected every single product she owned with the kind of calm precision that made me feel like I was watching someone check out of a hotel. She came back into the living room, bags lined up by the door, and she looked at me with an expression I've spent a lot of time trying to accurately describe. It wasn't cruelty. It was something quieter than that. It was finality. I'll come back for the rest of my stuff this weekend, she said. I'll leave a key under the mat, I said. And that was it. She walked out the door, and I stood in the living room for a very long time, not moving, not thinking anything particularly coherent, just staring at the door like it was going to open again on its own. It didn't. I looked down at the mug in my hand, still her lipstick on the rim. I washed it, and then I stood at the sink for another 10 minutes, holding the clean mug, understanding for the first time what the inside of an empty house actually sounds like. The Instagram post came 48 hours later. I wasn't going to look. I had muted her account, told myself I was taking the high road, decided that whatever she did next wasn't my business anymore. My friend Owen showed it to me. He came over Friday evening with a 6-pack and the kind of guilty expression that told me he'd seen something he wasn't sure he should share, decided he definitely shouldn't share it, and then picked up his phone and drove over to share it anyway. He held the screen out to me without saying a word. The photo was her. New outfit, new location, glowing in the way people glow when they're performing happiness for an audience. But it wasn't the photo that hit me. It was the caption. I finally upgraded my life. Sometimes you have to let go of what's comfortable to make room for what's better. So grateful for new chapters and people who actually match my energy. No looking back. Over 300 likes in under 2 days. Comments full of "you deserve this" and "she's glowing," and fire emojis from people who had been over to our apartment for dinner 6 weeks ago. I stared at it for about 12 seconds. Then I handed Owen his phone back. "So," he said carefully, "are you okay?" "Yeah," I said. "You sure?" "Mostly." He cracked open a beer and handed it to me. "She's already with that guy from the consulting firm," he said, and I could tell he was watching my face very closely. "The one who drives the..." "Owen." "Yeah." "I don't need to know." He nodded. "We watch basketball." But the caption stayed in my head long after he left. Upgraded. Like I was a software version that had gotten too slow. Like I was a car that had developed a rattle she couldn't ignore anymore. Like 2 years and 4 months of my life were just a stepping stone to something better. I lay in bed that night and stared at the ceiling, and I felt something I want to describe accurately because it matters later. It wasn't heartbreak exactly, or not only heartbreak. It was something sharper, something that lived right in the center of my chest and had no clean name. It was the specific humiliation of being told, publicly, that you weren't enough. And I made a decision that night. A quiet one. No announcement. No long journal entry about it. Just a single thought before I fell asleep. Okay, let's see what upgrade actually looks like. I want to be honest about what the next few months looked like, because they weren't cinematic. They weren't a montage of early morning runs and vision boards and inspirational speeches. They were mostly uncomfortable. I won't lie and tell you I handled the breakup gracefully from day one. The first week, I ate cereal for 3 meals a day and didn't return texts from people who asked how I was doing because I didn't have an answer that wasn't depressing. The second week was marginally better. I called my older brother, Qley, who lives about 4 hours away, and talked for 2 hours about nothing in particular. And at the end of the call he said, "You going to be okay?" And I said, "Eventually." And he said, "That's the right answer." The third week, something shifted. I went back to the gym. Not because I was trying to get revenge. Not because I had some dramatic montage in my head. Just because I had too much energy sitting in my chest and nowhere to put it, and lifting something heavy felt like the only honest response I had to the situation. I also started working. Really working. See, here's something I hadn't told anyone except Owen and Qley, and even then I'd been vague about the details. For about 14 months, I had been building something quietly on the side. A small consulting firm. Niche focus. Operational efficiency for mid-sized tech companies going through rapid growth phases. I had 2 clients when she left me. One contract worth about $30,000. One letter of intent that hadn't been signed yet. It was early. It was fragile. And honestly, part of why it had stayed early and fragile for so long was that I'd been pouring my energy into our relationship in ways I hadn't fully accounted for. Adjusting my schedule for her. Skipping networking events she found boring. Putting off a client pitch I'd been preparing for 3 months because she wanted us to go visit her parents that weekend, and I told myself the pitch could wait. It had waited a lot, and now I had nothing but time. I signed the second contract 2 weeks after she left. Then a third. Then, in month 3, I got a referral from one of my first clients that brought in a company twice the size of anything I'd worked with before. I hired my first employee, a guy named Fletcher who was sharper than me in every technical area I was weakest in, which was exactly what I needed. I moved out of my apartment into a proper office space. Small, just 3 rooms, but it had a real reception area and a conference room with a glass wall. And when I stood in it the first day and looked around, I felt something that was hard to place at first. It took me a minute to identify it. It was pride, not the loud kind, the quiet, settled kind that doesn't need an audience. I didn't post about any of this on Instagram. Not once. Meanwhile, the posts kept coming. I wasn't following her, but she existed in our mutual social circle, and sometimes things filtered through whether I wanted them to or not. She and the consulting firm guy, I learned his name was Spencer, were very public about their relationship very fast. Couple photos by month 2. A weekend in Paris, she captioned, "Life is too short for anything less than extraordinary." His car on her story with sunglasses on the dashboard and a song playing that I recognized was about moving up in the world. I won't pretend none of it stung. It did. Not constantly. Not even most of the time. But in certain quiet moments. Early mornings before the day started, late nights when the office was empty and I was the only one there. Yeah, it stung. But here's the thing no one tells you about pain. You can either sit with it until it owns you, or you can carry it while you build. I chose to carry it. And carrying something heavy while you walk far enough will either break you or make you very, very strong. I was beginning to understand which one was happening to me. Month 4 brought a problem. A big one. One of my newer clients, a mid-sized software company called Arrowhead Labs, had brought me in to streamline their internal operations before a major funding round. 2 weeks before I was due to deliver my final report, their internal team found an inconsistency in some of the data I'd been working with. It wasn't my error, but it was my report, my name on it. Their CFO called me personally, and the call was not pleasant. He used the word liability. He used the phrase, reconsidering the engagement. I sat very still in my office and listened to every word without interrupting. When he finished, I said, "Give me 72 hours. He said, "You have 48. I called Fletcher. I called 2 other people I trusted. We worked for 2 straight days. We found the inconsistency, traced it back to a data entry error in their own internal system that predated my involvement by 6 months, documented it thoroughly, revised the report to account for the corrected figures, and I personally delivered the updated findings to their executive team. They didn't just keep the contract. Their CEO shook my hand after the presentation and said, "I want to talk to you about what comes after the funding round." Fletcher and I went out for burgers after and barely said anything for the first 20 minutes. Then he looked at me and said, "You didn't panic once." I thought about that. "I didn't have time to," I said. But that wasn't entirely true. The real reason I didn't panic was that somewhere in the past 4 months, I had quietly, without announcing it, become the kind of person who didn't panic anymore. I didn't know exactly when it had happened, but it had happened. Month 5. Owen called me on a Thursday evening. I was still in the office, going over a proposal, and I almost didn't pick up. "Hey," he said. "Hey." So, a pause. "Brooke and Spencer broke up." I set my pen down. "Okay," I said. "Thought you should know." "Why?" "Because," he stopped. "I don't know. I just thought you'd want to." "I don't really need that information, Owen. You're not even a little." "No." He was quiet for a second. "You've changed," he said, and he didn't sound critical when he said it. He sounded almost awed. "I've been busy," I said. "It's more than that." I didn't respond to that. "Anyway," he said, "she's job hunting, I think. Spencer apparently got some position out of the country and she didn't go with him. Or he ended it. The story keeps changing depending on who you ask." I thought about the Paris photo. The sunglasses on the dashboard. Life is too short for anything less than extraordinary. "I hope she figures it out," I said. And I meant it genuinely. Not sarcastically. Not with bitterness underneath it. I actually meant it. Owen was quiet for a long second. "Yeah," he said finally. "Okay. How's the business?" "Good," I said. Good, or better than I expected," I said. "Honestly, better than I planned." He laughed a little. "You sound different." "Different how?" "Like you know something." I looked out the window at the street below the office. A couple walking with a dog. A woman on her phone laughing at something. The ordinary, ongoing business of the world that doesn't stop for your heartbreak. "I'm figuring some things out," I said. "Good," Owen said. "Yeah. I'll see you this weekend." Saturday works. We hung up. I sat with the information for a few minutes. Brooke and Spencer. Over. I thought about how I would have felt hearing that news 3 months ago. Some part of me would have felt vindicated. Some part would have felt the urge to show her the Instagram post. No looking back, remember? But sitting there in month 5, with Arrowhead Labs wanting to extend the contract and Fletcher already working on 2 new client proposals, and a real business that was actually beginning to feel like a real business, I felt almost nothing about Spencer and Brooke. And not the cold, performative nothing of someone pretending not to care. The real nothing. The kind that comes when something genuinely doesn't occupy space in you anymore. I picked up my pen. I went back to the proposal. I should tell you something about the weeks after she left that I haven't mentioned yet, because it reframes everything that came before it. About 3 days after the breakup, my phone buzzed with a message from a number I didn't recognize. It was a woman named Felicity, a mutual acquaintance, someone I'd met twice at parties, someone who moved in adjacent circles to both of us. The message said, "Hey, this is probably weird, but I heard what happened and I just want to say, she talked about you to me once, and it was more honest than she probably realized. She told me you were too focused on building something that might never work. For what it's worth, I believed you then. I still do. I read it twice. Too focused on building something that might never work." That was how she described me. Not to my face. To someone else. Not, "He's working hard, and I'm proud of him." Not, "He's building something, and I want to support it." Too focused on something that might never work. I remember sitting with that message for a long time. And I remember thinking, not angrily, but with a kind of cold clarity, that she had never actually believed in what I was building. Not once. She had tolerated it. She had managed it like a scheduling inconvenience. But believe in it? Truly, genuinely believe that it was going to become something? No. And I think, if I'm being deeply honest, I had always known that. I just hadn't wanted to look directly at it. Because looking at it directly would have meant asking myself why I was building something so important to me with someone who thought it might never work. That question had an answer I wasn't ready for. I saved Felicity's message. Not because I was going to do anything with it. Just because it was the first honest thing anyone had said to me in a while. Month 7. The company was doing well enough that I needed to expand. Not dramatically. I wasn't looking for a team of 20 people. But I needed someone who could handle client communications, manage scheduling, sit in on presentations and take detailed notes, and generally function as a coordinator between me, Fletcher, and our growing client list. I posted the position. Got 23 applications in the first week. Fletcher screened them down to 7 strong candidates for interviews. I glanced through the names and resumes on a Monday morning, coffee in hand, no particular urgency. 6 first-round interviews scheduled across 2 days. I wasn't doing the first-round screen myself. Fletcher was handling that. The candidates who passed the first round would come back and meet me directly. 2 days later, Fletcher knocked on my office door. For people moving forward, he said. All strong. Tuesday and Wednesday next week. Great, I said, not looking up from my laptop. Shoot me the details. He emailed me the schedule. I glanced at it briefly. For names. For time slots. I didn't study them closely. I had a client call in 20 minutes. I set it aside and moved on. Tuesday morning. First interview at 9, solid candidate, clearly prepared, asked good questions. 11 o'clock, another strong one, maybe slightly less prepared but confident in a way that felt genuine rather than performed. I had lunch at my desk. Wednesday morning. First interview at 10, honestly the best candidate yet, sharp and immediately likable. One more to go. 2 o'clock. I was back in the conference room, notes in front of me, glass of water on the table, Fletcher sitting to my left. Our receptionist knocked once and opened the door. Your 2 o'clock is here. Send them in, I said, and I was already looking back down at my notes. I heard the door open. I heard footsteps. And then those footsteps stopped. Just stopped. Completely. The way footsteps stop when someone has walked into a room and found something they were not expecting. I looked up. She was standing in the doorway. Brooke, in a blazer I'd never seen before, with her hair different, shorter than I remembered, and a portfolio folder held in both hands with the kind of grip that comes from needing something to hold on to. Looking at me, completely still. Her mouth was open slightly, like she'd started a sentence and the words had simply evaporated. Fletcher turned to look at her, then back at me. I held her gaze for a moment. Come in, I said. My voice was completely even. She didn't move for another 2 full seconds. Then she walked in. She sat down in the chair across from me. She set her portfolio folder on the table. She placed her hands flat on it, and I noticed, with a detached kind of observation, that her hands were not steady. Hi, she said. Hi, I said. Fletcher introduced himself, slid her a copy of the job description, explained the role briefly. I watched her face while he talked. She was very carefully not looking at me while she answered him. But every few seconds, she couldn't help it. She'd glance over. And every time she did, I looked back at her with the same calm, neutral expression. Not cold. Not hostile. Not smug. Just calm. The way you look at a thing you've already processed completely. Fletcher finished his intro and looked at me. I picked up my pen. Walk me through your last role, I said. She swallowed. I was at ClearBridge Solutions for the past 18 months, she said. I was working as an account coordinator, managing client relationships, scheduling, communications. Her voice was steady, professional. She was holding it together. I'd give her that. Why did you leave? I asked. The position was eliminated, she said. Restructuring? Yes. I wrote something down that was just a line, not actual words. What's your primary strength in a coordinator role? I asked. She answered it well. She answered everything well. She was good. That was the honest truth. She was a genuinely strong candidate on paper and in person, which complicated things in a way I hadn't anticipated. We went through 20 minutes of structured questions. She answered every one. Fletcher was clearly impressed. I could tell from the way he was writing things down with more energy than the earlier interviews. Then I asked her something that wasn't on our prepared list. Tell me about a time you misjudged a situation, I said. Professionally or otherwise. How did you handle it? Fletcher looked at me with a slight eyebrow raise. We hadn't prepped that one. She looked at me. For the first time in the whole interview, she looked directly at me and didn't look away immediately. And there was something in her eyes that wasn't part of any interview. I've made judgment calls that I thought were right at the time, she said slowly. That I thought were about moving forward. But sometimes what looks like forward is just, she paused. It's just different. Not better. Just different. The room was quiet. Fletcher wrote something down. I didn't write anything. What did you do after you realized the difference? I asked. I tried to figure out what I actually wanted, she said, versus what I thought I wanted. And, still working on that, she said quietly. I nodded once. Okay, I said. Do you have questions for us? She asked 2 professional questions. Good ones. Fletcher answered them. I stood up when the interview ended, extended my hand across the table. She shook it. Her grip was firm. Her eyes, when she met mine for those 3 seconds, held something I recognized, but wasn't going to name. We'll be in touch, I said. Thank you, she said. She picked up her portfolio folder. She walked out. Fletcher and I sat in silence for a few seconds after the door closed. So he said. Yeah, I said. You know her? It wasn't a question. Yeah. How? I picked up my pen. We dated. Fletcher was quiet. For how long? 2 years. More quiet. Okay, he said carefully. She's qualified, I said. She really is. Probably our second or third strongest candidate, depending how you weight the communication skills. Easily, Fletcher said. I capped my pen. We make the decision based on fit and qualifications, I said. That's it. Fletcher looked at me for a long moment. You're sure? Yes. Because I would completely understand if. Fletcher. Right. Got it. We debriefed the 4 candidates. We scored them on the criteria we'd established before the process started. It wasn't even particularly close. The candidate we'd interviewed Wednesday morning, a woman named Petra who had come in with a prepared deck of ideas about how she'd approached the first 60 days in the role, came out clearly on top. Brooke was third. Strong, but not the strongest. Fletcher sent the decisions that evening. An offer to Petra. Courteous declines to the other 3. Professional, warm, no unnecessary detail. I didn't write Brooks myself, but I read it before it went out. It was appropriate. I approved it. 2 days later, Friday evening, I was at my desk when my phone buzzed. Unknown number, but I knew before I even read it. I know this is probably not appropriate, but I needed to say something. Walking into that room was the most surreal moment of my life. You looked like someone I didn't fully know, which I realize says something about me, not you. I'm sorry. Not for the right strategic reasons. Just genuinely. I'm sorry. I read it twice. I sat with it for a while. This was the moment, I think, that would be the most satisfying in a certain kind of story. The vindication. The moment where the person who left comes back and says I was wrong, and the person they left gets to feel the full weight of that reversal. And I'd be lying if I said I felt nothing. I felt something. Something complicated and quiet. But here's what I didn't feel. I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel the urge to write back something cutting, something designed to land hard and leave a mark. I didn't feel the need to send her a screenshot of our latest contract or our office or any of the things I'd built. I thought about that night 8 months ago when I'd stood in my kitchen with a cold cup of coffee and understood, for the first time, what an empty house sounds like. I thought about the 3 meals of cereal and the 2 hours on the phone with Cole and the first morning back at the gym. I thought about 48 hours at a desk rebuilding a report I hadn't broken. I thought about Fletcher saying, "You didn't panic once." I thought about the morning I stood in our office space for the first time and felt something I eventually identified as pride. I thought about all of it. And then I typed back, "I appreciate you saying that. I genuinely hope things get better for you." That was it. No sting in it. No warmth either. Just the honest, simple truth of where I'd arrived. She typed back immediately. "You've built something real, haven't you?" Not a question. A recognition. I looked at it for a moment. "Still building," I wrote. She didn't reply after that. I put my phone face down. I went back to work. I want to tell you about a conversation I had with Cole about a month after the interview. He'd driven down to visit for a weekend, and we went out for dinner, and somewhere in the second hour he asked me to describe the business to him honestly. Not the headline version. The real version. I talked for about 20 minutes. Clients we had. Clients we were close on. Where I saw it going in 12 months. The things that scared me. The things I was proud of. The mistakes I'd made and what I'd learned from them. He listened to all of it. When I finished, he looked at me across the table and said, "Do you remember what you were like when you first started this thing?" "What do you mean?" "You'd tell me about it, and you'd hedge every sentence," he said. "Every single one. I think this might work, but I'm not sure. It could be something I don't know. Like you needed permission to believe in your own idea." I thought about that. He was right. "You don't do that anymore," he said. "No. You described everything tonight like you were describing something that exists," he said. "Not something you're hoping will exist. Something that already does." I let that settle. "She thought it might never work," I said. He nodded. "I heard. She said that to someone at a party." "I know. And the thing is," I said slowly, "I think a part of me believed her. I think when she said it, it landed in a way that things land when you've already had the same fear yourself." Cole didn't say anything. "And then she left," I said. "And the fear was still there. But she wasn't. So there was nothing to perform the fear for anymore. There was just me and the work." "And the work won," he said. "The work was always going to win," I said. "I just needed to get out of my own way." He raised his glass. I raised mine. We didn't say anything else about it. We didn't need to. Petra joined the team and was extraordinary from day one. She restructured our entire client communication system in her first 3 weeks, and Fletcher and I both found ourselves asking how we'd functioned without her. The company grew. Not exponentially. I'm not going to give you a number that sounds too big to be true. But steadily. Meaningfully. The kind of growth that isn't a spike you can't explain, but an upward line that you can trace back to specific decisions and specific work. I moved into a better apartment. Nothing dramatic. Just more space, a proper home office, a building I actually liked. I didn't take a photo of it for Instagram. I started sleeping better. I started going back to the things I'd quietly set aside during the relationship. Old friendships I'd let drift, hobbies I'd talked myself out of, books I'd been meaning to read. I'm not going to romanticize any of that into a self-help arc. Life just got fuller. That's the most honest word. Fuller. Owen called me about 6 months after the interview. You heard about the Spencer thing, right? He said. What Spencer thing? He's back. In the country. I felt nothing. Okay. He reached out to Brooke apparently. Owen, I genuinely don't need to know, I said. Not sarcastically. Not to be cool. I actually, sincerely don't need to know. A pause. Yeah, he said. Okay. Fair. How are you? I asked. And we talked about him for 45 minutes. His new apartment. The promotion he'd been chasing for 2 years that had finally come through. The woman he'd been quietly seeing for 3 months who he was starting to think might actually be something real. Normal life. Ongoing, forward-moving, ordinary life. Which is all any of it ever is, if you're doing it right. There's a thing that happens when you go through something like this. When someone looks at what you're building, at who you are right now, at this moment, and decides it isn't enough. And then they announce to the world that they've upgraded. There's a version of you that takes that personally in a way that either destroys you or turns you into someone bitter and scorekeeping. And there's another version. If you're lucky, if you make the right choices in those quiet moments when nobody's watching, where you take it differently, where you hear, you're not enough, and something in you says, very quietly, watch. Not out of revenge, not out of spite, out of something simpler, out of the conviction that the only honest response to being underestimated is to become undeniable. Not for them. For the version of yourself that was always there, waiting, underneath all the performing and adjusting and shrinking. I didn't know the morning she walked out with 3 neatly packed bags that I was about to have the most productive 8 months of my life. I didn't know that 48 hours after the breakup, someone would tell me that she described my work as something that might never work, and that hearing that would quietly ignite something I'd been sitting on for over a year. I didn't know that 7 months later, she'd walk into a conference room and freeze mid-sentence because the person sitting across from her wasn't the comfortable, slightly uncertain version she'd left behind. I didn't plan any of it. I just worked. I just showed up. I just refused, in those quiet moments at the desk at 11 o'clock at night, to let the story end with her caption. I finally upgraded my life. Fine. But the thing about upgrades is they're only relative. They're only as permanent as the gap between what you had and what you found. And gaps have a way of closing, and reversing, and becoming something completely different from what anyone expected. I haven't spoken to Brooke since that Friday night text exchange. There's nothing dramatic about that. No restraining orders, no bitter confrontations, no scenes. Just 2 people whose lives moved in different directions, the way lives do. She found a new position. I heard from Owen eventually. A different company, new role, seemed like a decent fit. I hoped it was. I genuinely hoped it was good for her. Because here's the thing I had to get honest with myself about. Eventually, in all that quiet, the relationship had run its course long before she left. I had been building something. She wanted something different. Those are just facts. Not villains and heroes. Just 2 people whose wants had grown in opposite directions and who should have had that conversation far sooner than we did. Her leaving hurt. The way she did it, the Instagram post, the caption, the upgrade, that was unnecessary. But the underlying reality, the incompatibility, that was true. That was real. And in some way, I'm still untangling. The public humiliation of that post was the exact thing that made me stop hedging every sentence about my own work. She didn't mean to do me a favor, but she did. And I hold that without bitterness. You can hold something without bitterness. It just takes time. And work. Mostly work. Petra knocked on my office door last week. You have a 3:30, she said. I know. You look tired. Late night. You were here at 7 this morning, she said, not accusatory, just noting a fact. I like mornings, I said. Nobody likes mornings that start at 7 after a late night, she said. Get a coffee before the call. Fletcher appeared in the doorway behind her. She's right, he said. I know she's right. So go get coffee. I'm getting coffee. I got up, walked to the little kitchen we had off the main room, stood there for a second with the mug in my hand. And for just a moment, I thought of a different kitchen, a cold cup of coffee, a lipstick rim, the sound of a door. And then I thought of Petra reorganizing the filing system on her second day. Fletcher tracing the source of a data error with 5 hours of straight focus. Cole raising his glass across a dinner table. Owen, who is bad at knowing when to share things but whose heart is always in the right place. The Arrowhead Labs CEO shaking my hand. The upward line on the report. The office I stood in the first morning and felt something I eventually identified as pride. I poured the coffee. I walked back to my desk. I took the 3:30. The Instagram post is still there if you looked for it. I finally upgraded my life. I don't think about it. Not because I've suppressed it. Not because I've risen above it in some performance of enlightenment. But because the thing about upgrades is they're just the beginning of the story. And the story keeps going. It keeps going whether you're watching or not. Whether anyone posts about it or not. Whether anyone applauds or not. It just keeps going. And if you stay in it long enough, if you show up and work and refuse to let someone else's caption be the last word about your worth, you eventually arrive somewhere they didn't see coming. Somewhere you didn't fully see coming either. And you sit there in a glass-walled conference room with your name on the lease and your team down the hall, and someone walks through the door who once told the world they'd upgraded away from you, and they stop mid-sentence because the room doesn't match the story they'd been telling themselves. And you just look at them calmly, and you say, come in, because you're not angry, because you don't need to be, because the work already said everything. The coffee in my mug that morning wasn't cold. That was the whole difference.